Story credited to Lucas. You never really think much about the neighbors who live around you. People come and go, and most of us mind our own business. I know I used to. That was until I met Ben. Ben moved into the house next door in early September. I didn't know much about him at first, just that he was quiet and kept to himself. But that's normal, right? People have their own lives, their own routines. I'm no different. Work, groceries, rinse, repeat. It wasn't until the weekend after he moved in that I really noticed him. It was a Saturday, late afternoon. I was mowing my lawn when Ben came out onto his porch. He waved and I waved back. It was the first time we acknowledged each other. "Hey there," he called out. "Hey," I shouted over the mower. I stopped for a second and turned it off. "You just move in?" He nodded. "Yeah, a few days ago." He had a friendly face, dark hair, mid-30s, probably a little older than me, but not by much. He seemed normal, just normal. Over the next few weeks, we had more small talk. Nothing deep, just the usual neighborly exchanges. It felt nice to have someone friendly next door. But as time passed, I started noticing some strange things about Ben's house. The first thing was the lights. Ben never seemed to turn them off. It didn't matter what time of night it was. I could always see that dim yellow glow coming from his windows. At first, I thought he was just the type of guy who slept with the lights on. But even when I'd leave for work early in the morning, the lights would still be on. It seemed odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe he worked from home and just kept the lights on to make the place feel less empty. Then there were the noises. It started out small, just little creaks and thumps. I figured it was the usual stuff you hear in an old house. But then, I began to notice something stranger. Every night, around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd hear this scraping sound. It was faint, like furniture being dragged across the floor. I figured Ben was rearranging things, but why at such odd hours? One night, I saw his shadow moving back and forth across the window. I thought maybe he couldn't sleep, so he was pacing. Again, strange but not alarming. Not yet. It wasn't until one afternoon in mid-October that things took a turn. I was getting home from work, later than usual. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the street. Ben was outside, sitting on his porch, staring out at nothing. I waved as usual, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, hunched over, his face pale and tired. I mean, he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "You good, man?" I asked. He blinked and looked at me like he hadn't noticed I was there. "Huh? Oh, yeah, just tired." I hesitated. Something about his voice felt off, flat, almost. "Rough day?" He let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't the kind that makes you feel at ease. It was more like the kind you let out when you're overwhelmed. You could say that. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't want to pry. He stood up, gave a half-hearted wave, and went inside. That was the last time I saw him act remotely normal. The next few nights were different. The noises from his house got louder. The scraping sound started earlier, sometimes around midnight, and I started hearing something else. It was hard to describe, like a faint voice, muffled but rhythmic. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was definitely there. I'm not the type to get freaked out easily, but this was starting to wear on me. I'd lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to whatever was happening next door. Part of me wanted to go over and check on Ben, but another part of me didn't want to know what was going on in that house. One night it got so loud that I couldn't take it anymore. It was almost 3 a.m., and the scraping had turned into banging. I grabbed my phone thinking about calling Ben or maybe even the cops, but as soon as I picked it up, everything went silent, like completely silent. I stared at my phone for a few seconds, heart pounding, trying to figure out what just happened. I could still see the light coming from Ben's windows. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door around noon, hoping to catch him while it was still daylight. But no one answered. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when I noticed something odd. The front door, it wasn't fully closed, it was just slightly open. I stood there for a second, debating whether I should push it open or walk away. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside, calling out for Ben, but the place was dead silent. The house smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in weeks. The living room was a mess. Papers, old takeout containers, and empty bottles scattered across the floor. It looked like he hadn't cleaned in a while, but that wasn't what bothered me. It was the upstairs door, the one leading to the attic. It was wide open. I couldn't explain it, but something about that open door made my stomach turn. I had this feeling, this horrible, gut-wrenching feeling that I shouldn't be there. I should have left. I know that now, but I didn't. I called out for Ben one last time, my voice shaky. No answer. I turned and left the house as fast as I could. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, no one's seen Ben. His house is still lit up every night, the lights blazing like a beacon. But it's dead quiet. No more scraping. No more voices. I don't know what happened to him, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still in there, watching, waiting. The other night I thought I saw him through the window, just standing there staring out at the street. But when I looked again, he was gone. I haven't told anyone about this. What would I even say, that my neighbor just vanished? That something in his house is wrong? I don't have any proof, just a feeling. A deep, unsettling feeling that whatever happened to Ben isn't over. And every night when I lay in bed, I still wait for the noise. Story credited to Ethan. You ever move into a new place and immediately feel like something's just off? That was me a little over a year ago. I was in a rough spot, just got out of a long relationship, needed a fresh start, and this house, this little one-story rental, seemed perfect. Quiet neighborhood, nice enough on the outside, and the price was a steal. I thought it was a sign, you know? A chance to hit reset. The first few weeks were uneventful. I unpacked, set up my home office, and started settling into my new life. The place had a charm to it. Older but sturdy. The floors creaked a little when you walked on them, and the paint was chipped here and there, but nothing that screamed, "Run for the hills." I figured it just needed some TLC, maybe a coat of fresh paint to brighten things up. Then, things started happening. It wasn't dramatic at first, little things like I'd leave a door open and come back to find it closed. Or I'd set something down, like my keys, and later find them in a different spot. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I was just distracted, not paying attention. You know how you can misplace things without realizing it? That's what I told myself. But after a while, it got harder to explain. One night I came home after grabbing groceries, put the bags down, and went to use the bathroom. When I came back, one of the bags was tipped over on the counter, but I hadn't heard anything fall. The weird thing was that nothing had actually fallen out. It was just placed differently, like someone had gently moved it. I brushed it off. Maybe I didn't balance it right on the edge of the counter. That made sense, right? A week later, I was sitting on the couch, just flipping through channels. It was late, maybe 11 or so, and I was trying to unwind after a long day. The house was quiet, as usual. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this faint noise. It was subtle, like a soft thud coming from the back of the house near the bedroom. I muted the TV, straining to hear it again, but everything was still. My mind jumped to the usual rational explanation. Maybe something fell over, or the house was settling, or a neighbor's cat had gotten into the backyard. It wasn't the kind of thing to freak out over, so I shrugged it off. But that noise? I don't know. It stuck with me. Over the next few days, more things started happening. Doors would be slightly ajar when I knew I'd closed them. Lights would flicker just enough to make me second guess if they were faulty. I'd hear faint, almost rhythmic tapping, like someone gently drumming their fingers on the walls when I was in bed. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I'd convinced myself it was all in my head, that I was just adjusting to a new place. But that only worked for so long. One night, I had a friend over, Mike. We were just hanging out, talking, catching up. At some point, we started talking about the house, and I casually mentioned the weird stuff that had been happening. Mike's one of those practical types, you know? Doesn't buy into any of the ghost or paranormal stuff, so he just laughed it off and told me I was being paranoid. We both laughed about it, and the night carried on as usual, until we both heard it, that soft tapping. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Mike stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. I knew he heard it too. We both sat there for a moment listening. "Dude," he said, "what the hell was that?" I couldn't answer. It was coming from the hallway, right near my bedroom door. The tapping, like fingers lightly knocking against the wall. Then, just as suddenly as it started, It stopped. I got up, trying to act casual, but my heart was racing. I checked the hallway, the bedroom. Everything was in its place. Nothing was out of the ordinary, except for the fact that we both heard something that shouldn't have been there. Mike left not long after that. He didn't say much, but I could tell it freaked him out. After he was gone, I sat on the couch staring down the hallway, wondering what the hell was happening in my house. The turning point came about a month later. I had come home late from work, tired and just wanting to collapse into bed. As soon as I opened the front door, I felt it. The air in the house felt different, heavier. It's hard to explain, but it was like walking into a room after an argument where the tension is still thick in the air. I brushed it off, chalking it up to stress, and went straight to the bathroom to wash up. When I came back into the living room, I froze. The kitchen chairs, all 4 of them, were pulled out from the table, and they were arranged perfectly, like someone had taken the time to line them up in a straight row. I hadn't touched them. I know I hadn't. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I called a handyman to come check out the house. Maybe there was something structural I wasn't seeing. Loose pipes, a draft, anything that could explain the strange noises and movements. He checked everything, and when he was done, he shrugged. "House is solid," he said. "No issues, you're good." But I wasn't good. I felt like I was living in a place that wasn't entirely mine, like I was sharing it with someone or something. After that, I started doing some research. I didn't want to, but I had to know more about the house. Turns out the previous tenant had lived there for almost 15 years, and according to a neighbor, she'd died alone in the house. Her family didn't come around much, and it was days before anyone found her. It made sense in a sick way. The moving objects, the noises, maybe it was her. Maybe she hadn't really left. Maybe I was just living in her space and she was trying to make herself known. I didn't know what to do with that information. I mean, what do you do when you think your house might be haunted by the person who died there? I considered moving out, but I just signed a year lease and financially, I couldn't swing it, so I stayed. But I started talking to her. I know it sounds crazy, but it felt like the right thing to do. Every night before bed, I'd say something like, "I know this was your home and I don't mean any harm. I hope you can find peace." It didn't stop the strange occurrences entirely, but they did become less frequent. And over time, that oppressive feeling started to lift little by little. I'm still in the house, and every now and then I hear that soft tapping in the walls, or I'll find something moved just slightly out of place. But I've learned to live with it. Whatever, or whoever it is, I think we've reached an understanding. Story credited to Adam. I've always been a logical person, never one to believe in ghosts, spirits, or any of that stuff. If you can't explain it, it didn't happen. That's how I've always approached life, which is probably why what happened to me still doesn't make any sense. It started about a year ago when I moved into this apartment in upstate New York. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 2-bedroom unit in an older building, but it had charm. Wooden floors, big windows, and the rent was reasonable, which was exactly what I needed after getting out of a pretty rough breakup. From the first day, though, I noticed something off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first, but there was a heaviness to the place. Like, you know that feeling when you walk into a room and just sense someone's been there, like the air still holds on to them. That's what it felt like, even though the apartment was completely empty. But honestly, I didn't think much of it. I was too focused on getting settled, unpacking boxes, setting up the furniture. It's easy to write off weird vibes when you've got a million other things going on, right? The first night, though, I had trouble sleeping. The place was dead quiet, but every few hours I'd wake up. Not to any noise, just a feeling. Like I wasn't alone. You know how sometimes you wake up and just feel like something's off? That's how it was. The next morning I shook it off. Sleep deprivation, I figured. Maybe it was just the stress of the move, adjusting to a new place. It happens. But then, things started happening. Small at first. I'd come home from work and find that things weren't exactly where I'd left them. The remote would be on the floor when I knew I'd left it on the coffee table. My shoes, which I always lined up by the door, would be scattered. But again, I wasn't ready to believe something strange was going on. I mean, who's going to believe that? You tell someone that stuff's moving around in your apartment, and they think you're either a prank victim or you're losing it. The tipping point came about a week later. It was a Saturday morning, and I had the day off. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard this faint knocking sound coming from the hallway. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just steady. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it was coming from the neighbors. Maybe someone was hammering something, but it was too soft, too rhythmic, like it was on the wall right outside my bedroom door. I froze for a second, spatula in hand, just listening. When the knocking didn't stop, I walked over to the hallway and leaned against the wall, pressing my ear to it. Nothing. The knocking stopped. I laughed at myself, feeling ridiculous. I turned to go back to the kitchen when the knocking started again, louder this time, faster. It was like someone was trying to get my attention. I stood there staring at the hallway door. My heart started racing, but I wasn't scared yet, more curious than anything. I thought, okay, this is weird, but maybe it's something with the plumbing. I walked over, opened the door to the hallway closet where the noise seemed to be coming from, and saw nothing. It was just the same empty space filled with my cleaning supplies. That night I went to bed early, telling myself I'd forget about it. And I did, for a while. A couple of days passed without any incidents, and I started thinking I'd imagined the whole thing. But the real shift happened on a Wednesday night. I was in the living room watching TV when the temperature in the apartment dropped. And I mean, it had been a warm autumn day, but suddenly the air felt icy cold. I got up to check the thermostat. It was set at 72 degrees, like always. I put on a hoodie and sat back down, but the cold seemed to follow me. I could feel it pressing against my skin, crawling up my arms. That's when I heard it again, the knocking. But this time it was louder. It wasn't coming from the hallway, it was coming from the door to my bedroom. I got up slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. I walked down the hallway, heart in my throat, and stopped outside the bedroom door. The knocking continued, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I should have opened the door, confronted whatever it was. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the doorknob, too afraid to move. After what felt like hours, the knocking stopped. The silence was deafening. The next day, I did some research. I know how it sounds. I'm not the type to go looking for ghost stories. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about this place. I went online and started searching for the building's history, previous tenants, anything that might explain what was happening. And that's when I found it. Apparently, the guy who lived here before me, a guy named Jason, had disappeared. Just vanished one day. No note, no trace of where he'd gone. His rent check stopped coming, and after a couple of months, the landlord cleared out his stuff and listed the apartment again. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Jason had lived in this very apartment. His things had been where mine were now, and then he was gone. I started thinking about the cold spots, the noises, the feeling of not being alone. It wasn't random. It was. Jason was still here, or at least part of him was. That night, the knocking came again, but this time I didn't freeze. I got up, walked straight to the bedroom door and opened it. The room was freezing cold, the air so thick I could barely breathe. But no one was there. No one. Except me.